45 years, same enemy, no victory. The most powerful military in human history, the largest intelligence apparatus ever built, sanctions that have collapsed a nation's entire currency, generals assassinated, the supreme leaders assassinated, nuclear facilities destroyed by code without a single soldier ever having to cross the border. And the conflict is still here. If you're looking for headlines, this is probably the wrong video. If you want to understand why the headlines never change, stay till the very end because we're going to decode this entire conflict and you will change your perspective forever. Because here's what's actually happening beneath the conflict. Not strategy, not politics, not military strength, a system running exactly as designed. And once you see the system, you will see it everywhere. In businesses, in organizations, in every place where an overwhelming force keeps failing a smaller opponent. Let's start with where it always starts. One wrong assumption. Imagine you are in an arm wrestling match. You are significantly stronger, so you grip harder, push harder, more muscle, more force. Your opponent doesn't go down, they put in equal efforts. You apply more force, they resist. Minutes pass by and your arm starts to tire. Theirs does too, but here is the fundamental difference. They came in prepared to lose for an hour. You came in expecting to win in 30 seconds. So the real question that you should be asking is who here had the real advantage? Let me tell you something, winning and not losing are not two sides of the same game. They are two completely different games played on the same board. If your goal is to survive, you are almost impossible to defeat. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, every single time it's the same pattern, just a different flag. The large power tries to win. The small power tries to survive. And survival, ladies and gentlemen, is a more durable motivation than victory. Here's why. Powerful nations optimize for victory. Asymmetric opponents optimize for something else entirely. Not losing. When your objective is to win, you need a decisive blow. You need to destroy, capture, force, submission. The clock is always against you. Resources are finite. Political will erodes. When your objective is to not lose, you just need to be standing there tomorrow. Every day the conflict actually continues is a day you have actually succeeded. Time is not your enemy, time is your biggest weapon. Think about what Iran absorbed in the last 45 years. Currency collapse, Qasem Soleimani, its most effective military mind, assassinated. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, assassinated. Nuclear scientists killed. Weapon facilities destroyed. Proxy networks in Gaza and Lebanon systematically dismantled. By every conventional measure, Iran has been severely damaged. The regime, however, it is actually still there. The asymmetry law states that the larger player must destroy. The smaller player only needs to survive. Destruction requires success every single time. Survival requires it just once each day. America needed to break Iran's will. Iran only needed to outlast America's appetite. Appetite runs out faster than will every single time. But this asymmetry in military terms has a mirror image in political terms, and the mirror image is exactly where this conflict is actually being fought. Let me explain. In 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran did not adopt opposition to America as a policy position. They built it into their walls. A load-bearing wall is not decorative. It is not optional because if you remove it, the entire building goes on to collapse. Every Friday prayer in Iran actually ended with death to America. That is not political theater, not a bargaining chip. That is the architecture of the state. The regime's right to exist is rooted in its resistance to America and Israel. That is not a policy, that becomes the identity of the state. And this creates a dynamic almost no Western strategist actually accounts for. Peace is dangerous because peace asks a question the regime cannot fundamentally answer. What was all the suffering for? If the great Satan is no longer a threat, if the enemy is normalized, traded with, made relevant, what exactly was the Islamic Revolution protecting people from? What was the poverty for? The isolation, the generations of young Iranians who could not travel, who could not access the world like every single person, who could not build normal lives. The enemy is not a problem to be solved, the enemy is a service being provided. When a system's survival depends on a problem existing, it will never solve the problem, it will manage it, escalate it, keep the problem alive forever. This is why every nuclear deal collapses, every back channel fails, every negotiation ends where the last one began. Not necessarily because of bad faith, but structural impossibility. You cannot make peace with your own foundation, and before you think this is only an Iranian problem, America has the same trap and it is hiding in plain sight. Let me expose this. Here is the deepest structural problem of all. Both sides have internal reasons to keep this conflict alive. The Iranian regime, because the external enemy justifies internal repression, because death to America stops people from asking harder questions about the economy, the corruption, the gap between what the revolution promised and what 45 years actually delivered. And on the American side, defense contractors need a threat to justify budgets. Politicians need a foreign crisis to unify votes. Analysts need a conflict to stay relevant. The system is not a single villain, it is a group of forces that are actually keeping this conflict alive. When both sides benefit more from the problem than the solution, the problem ultimately never gets solved. Write that down, because you will see that pattern in every long running conflict, in every broken organization, in every relationship that should have ended years ago. America actually has the capacity to end this conflict decisively. What it does not have is, it does not have the will to do what the ending would require it to do. Capability and will should not be mistaken for the same thing. They are not. Rome did not fall because its legends lost the skills. The British Empire did not fade because it ran out of soldiers. The Soviet Union did not dissolve because it could not project force. They fell because the internal cost of sustaining the empire exceeded what the political system could fundamentally absorb. Same pattern, different century. America is a democracy, and democracy means every use of force must survive the news cycle, the elections cycle, the international press, and the historical books simultaneously. Iran actually answers to none of this, and Iran actually knows this. This is not a criticism of democracy, it is a structural reality that asymmetric opponents have studied, internalized, and turned it into a weapon to fight one of the biggest countries in the world as and when I'm speaking. You do not need to defeat the American military, you need to defeat the American public's patience. Those are two completely different battlegrounds, and the second one is vastly more accessible, at least to Iran. The battlefield is not in the Middle East, the battlefield is in American domestic politics. Now sit with this, because we are about to go somewhere most people don't go in terms of first principles thinking of a conflict. Iran's greatest strategic asset is not its proxies, not its nuclear programs, not Hezbollah, not the Houthis, not the Revolutionary Guards. Iran's greatest strategic asset is the American values itself. America isn't losing despite its values, it's actually struggling because of them. Let me explain. Civilian casualties. America cares deeply and politically. Iran's regime had killed thousands of its own people when they came on streets to protest about the government. The calculation is not the same. International law. America's global credibility depends on operation within a rule-based system that it actually built decades ago. Violating it costs diplomatic capital across every relationship it has with major countries. Iran is already isolated, and it does not pay the same price as the United States of America. Press freedom. American reporters document everything. Iran controls its own information environment completely. Every value that makes America a better system to live under becomes a tactical vulnerability against an opponent with no equivalent constraints. Iran has spent 4 decades studying exactly what America will not do, and it built its entire strategy inside that space. Hide weapons in civilian infrastructure, operate through proxies, force moral dilemmas instead of military ones, make every escalation look like pure American aggression. When you cannot match the enemy's force, you make the enemy's force its own enemy. That is not unique to just Iran, Taliban, Hezbollah. It's just the same playbook, just a different map. And here is the truth nobody is telling in the current news and the current cycle. America cannot win this conflict the way it wants to win it. Not cleanly, not quickly, not with minimal casualties and international approval and a clear endpoint that everybody can point to. The only path to a decisive end requires America to do something that it refuses to do. So instead, it does something very human, very understandable, and very costly. It keeps doing what doesn't fully work and calls it strategy. Strikes that damage but don't destroy, sanctions that hurt but don't collapse, red lines that get crossed but get redrawn, negotiations that begin where the last ones ended. Half measures against an opponent that only needs to survive is not a strategy, they are a contribution to the opponent's longevity. One thinking tool, 3 questions, run it on any conflict, geopolitical, organizational, personal. Question 1. What game is each side actually playing? Now, what they say, what their actions actually reveal. Winning and not losing are different games. Never assume both sides are playing the same one. Question 2, and this is one of the most important questions that you should be asking. Who benefits from the conflict continuing? Look past the stated goals. Find the internal incentives. Anyone who benefits from the problem existing will never be a reliable partner in solving it. Find them first, then discount everything they say about wanting peace. Question 3. What is the most powerful side unwilling to do and why? The gap between capability and will is where every weaker opponent builds their strategy. Find that gap and you will exactly know where this conflict is going to go next. This works on war, on corporate negotiations, on salary conversations, and on why governments keep failing to solve problems that they have actually allocated budgets to fix. Power is not enough. Will is the variable that determines the outcome, and will in nations as in people is always shaped by something deeper than strategy. The US-Iran conflict will not end because one side defeats the other. It will end if it ends when the internal calculus changes entirely, when the regime can no longer sell the narrative of an external threat to a population that has stopped believing in it, or when America finds a president and a public willing to absorb the true cost of a fundamentally unique resolution. Neither of those conditions exist today. The conflict is going to continue. The system is going to continue. Strikes and responses, proxies and counter proxies, headlines that feel latest and modern but are structurally identical to the headlines from 1983, from 1998, from 2006. Most conflicts don't end, they just become normal. The face changes, the dynamics do not. I want to leave you with one question, not about Iran, not about America. Where in your own life are you on the powerful side, with full capability, applying half measures to a problem that requires a decision you are unwilling to make? What is your capability will gap? Because that gap is present in people just like how it's present in nations, and that is where all unresolved lives and problems actually live. That's the Power Playbook. Drop the question you're sitting with in the comments. That's the one I'll actually respond to. Think from scratch, build what matters. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I will see you tomorrow.